Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Andrew Donovan. The Onondaga County District Attorney has had a very busy last year as the special prosecutor in 2 prison beating deaths. Joining me now to look back at that assignment is DA Bill Fitzpatrick. Mr. DA, thanks for being here.
Always good to see you, Andrew. Thank you.
Most of these officers across both cases have been convicted. Do you consider this mostly over, this assignment as special prosecutor in both of these cases?
Yes, the only thing we have left is there's maybe 4, 5 at the most corrections officers that have yet to be sentenced, but those sentences have already been predetermined, so it'd be ministerial. And once that's done, the only thing left for me to do is work on the appeals.
Right, and David Walters is one of the officers in the Marcy case who's actually out, was not asked to, was not forced to keep his plea in place in terms of the being in jail or prison right now.
Yep.
He's out, but that's because he's trying to take back his plea.
Well, yeah, but that's not the only reason he's out. You asked the judge why he let him out down in, I think, Binghamton. I still can't understand that, but in any event, what we did was we prosecuted a number of corrections officers for doing nothing. And that sounds counterintuitive to people. Well, don't you have to do something affirmative? If you're a parent and you abandon a child, you've committed a crime. If you're a doctor and you mistreat a patient or you fail to treat a patient that you have an obligation to do, you could be charged with a crime. And I think the same applies to corrections officers and incarcerated individuals, because the incarcerated individual is completely dependent on the corrections officer for food, sustenance, shelter, safety, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the appellate division will agree with me.
So you're saying part of the prosecution on some of these defendants was not that they acted in the progress of doing something, they didn't act to stop.
Exactly. If you recall the tape of Robert Brooks, you'll see an officer who literally could reach over and touch Robert, or could have shielded Robert, or could have, and he was a sergeant. He could have turned around to his fellow corrections officers and said, "Are you guys out of your mind? This guy's, beaten to a pulp. Enough." And then we'd never have heard of the name Robert Brooks. He didn't do that. The most affirmative thing he did was to get out of the way so they could get better leverage at punching Robert. I think that is criminal. He pled guilty. He's in prison right now. And depending on his appeal, he'll stay in prison.
Let's talk about that case first. The Robert Brooks case, he was killed at the Marcy Correctional Facility. 11 officers have been convicted. 9 are serving time, either a shorter sentence in jail or much longer sentences in prison.
Right, up to life. One corrections officer is serving life for murdering Robert.
What do you make of the results of that case?
Professionally, I'm very proud of the result. My office, I had 4 assistant DAs that were system meet 2 on each case. Their performance was nothing short of magnificent, and very appreciative of that. I felt a lot of responsibility with the case, because it's not just an Oneida County case, it's really a statewide case. It was a crime against all of us. And I think one of the nicest things that could have been said was said by the Attorney General at, ironically enough, the state DA's conference in January, and she was very laudatory in her comments about me, and I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, some of the minimum prison sentences, 25 years, 22 years, 22 years, 15 years.
Right. Yeah. Robert Jr., when I first met him, he's a great kid. I think he's 20 now, and I remember meeting him at his lawyer's office in Rochester, and he was, a little standoffish. Who's this, upstate conservative white Republican DA? What's he going to do for me? And kind of like, tell me when the resignations are, and everybody goes away. And I said, nah, Robert, I said, give me some time. And now I love the kid, and the kid loves me, which is great.
Of that case, is there 1 or 2 of the officers' behaviors that really stand out as atrocious?
Oh, yeah. On both cases?
We'll start with Marcy.
Yeah, Marcy, yeah, definitely. You could see from the tape there was Farina and, they're just choking him, the people that punched him, the people that beat him about the head. They're clearly, when I looked at it with my assistant DAs who were designated as attorneys general, we targeted certain people. And every one of the people we targeted relative to the death of Robert is convicted and is in state prison. Same with Messiah Nantwi. There were 2 people, Caleb Blair and Jonah Levy. Levy is serving 25 years. Blair will be sentenced to 11 years. Levy went to trial, Blair took a plea bargain. But those were the two individuals who most participated in causing the death of Messiah. The other people were accomplices to some degree.
Yeah, in the Marcy case, the stiffest sentences are for Anzalone, Farina, Kingsley, who was convicted by a jury, and Walrath was your first plea in that case, I remember.
Right, yeah. And they, one of the difficulties with releasing the tape is when you're trying to pick a jury, you ask the question, have you seen the tape? I've seen the tape. I could never have sat on the jury having seen the tape, and that makes it more difficult to select a jury.
Yeah. And you've already given us some thoughts on the Midstate prison case, but in total, 15 officers, 15 were convicted. 8 are serving time either jail or state prison.
Right. A lot of the people convicted in that had to do with not necessarily participating in the beating of Messiah, but participating in the cover-up. They tried to plant a makeshift, I'll call it a shiv. It's like a sharpened instrument. They had seized that earlier that day in a completely unrelated matter and tried to present it as having been justification for beating Messiah to death. And then they all filed false reports, as they did in the Brooks case, which apparently is a way of life.
And in the Midstate case, the Messiah Nantwi death, then they all got together at a diner to concoct the story.
Oh, not according to the defense. That was just a normal get-together to see how everybody was doing, which they had never done before in their entire life. I laugh. I love defense lawyers, but sometimes it's hard to fathom. Yeah, they got there to look. We're going to stick together. This is a esprit de corps. You know, man up. We're all in this together. That's what it was about. Everybody knew that.
Was it tougher to come by evidence for Midstate because the video was not as plentiful?
There essentially was no video in Messiah's case of the actual beating in his room and in the hallway. There was some inadvertent video that was caught at the infirmary. For example, Levy and Blair fist bumping each other, which incensed Judge Nolan, rightfully so. There were also 2 officers who were in a men's room, and unbeknownst to them, another officer had hung his jacket with the body-worn camera attached, and they were talking about the planting of the shiv, and then when they turned around to see the camera, expletive deleted, and that was powerful evidence against them.
All right, we'll take our first break. More with the Onondaga County District Attorney when Newsmakers continues. Newsmakers is back. Our guest is the Onondaga County District Attorney, who's also been serving as a special prosecutor for 2 high-profile prison death cases. DA Bill Fitzpatrick, though, is Onondaga County's own. He joins us this week on Newsmakers. I wonder if you've thought about the timing between the 2 cases. Not so much the prosecution, but the Marcy was already a well-known incident by the time the people involved in Midstate did what they did.
You know, I thought about the timing a lot. Messiah was killed March 1st, 2025. 10 days earlier, I arraigned a dozen people in the death of Robert Brooks for murder. And these people at Midstate, it was the talk of the correctional facilities all over the state of New York. There was a lot of disagreement about body-worn cameras. You know, you can hear during the prosecution of the Nantwi case, you can hear officers saying, well, they don't have to wear body-worn cameras. Well, that's nonsense. A directive went out after the death of Robert that from the commissioner, Dan Marticello, you've got to wear body-worn cameras when you have encounters with an incarcerated individual. So they were in direct violation of that directive.
How hard would you say were these cases to prosecute?
They were very difficult because, you know, picture, 18 people as prospective jurors. Do any of you know anyone involved in corrections? And, 14 hands go up.
Well, in Oneida County, where there are at least 3 state prisons.
Correct, correct. And that makes it hard. The prison guards are generally considered the good guys, and most of the time they are. The incarcerated individuals, well, they're not worthy of our attention, so it was tough.
Let's talk about what the state can hopefully learn from these cases. And I know you're kind of switching your role now from a special prosecutor to using what you've learned to help influence what happens next. You got these assignments because the Attorney General had to recuse her office from this.
Right.
Is that the first thing that should change? Something within the mechanism of the State Attorney General's office?
Well, I'd like to see a special arm of the Attorney General's office dealing solely with crimes that occur at correctional facilities, be it assaults on corrections officers or assaults on incarcerated individuals. Right now, the Attorney General has jurisdiction over police-involved fatalities, and that has been kind of expanded a little bit beyond the original intent, which is okay with me. For example, you know, an off-duty officer that kills someone in a traffic accident, they have asserted jurisdiction over cases like that. But I think that you know, should be properly funded, of course, and budgetary-wise. And I've talked to the Attorney General about that, and she hasn't expressed an opinion to me one way or the other, but I think it's something worth considering.
What do you think needs to change as a result of these deaths? A
couple of things that are very, very simple. First of all, complete surveillance in the correctional facilities. I was stunned to learn that there weren't, you know, outdoor cameras. If I go to Walmart, I'm on tape. But here I can walk into Marcy and I can do so, you know, without being videoed, all over the correctional facility. Secondly, mandatory body-worn cameras. They're on. They're activated anytime you have an encounter with an incarcerated individual. Failure to do so, first one is a disciplinary action. Second one, you're fired if you fail to turn them on. Something else that I think is doable is eliminating paper mail into the correctional facilities. That all legal correspondence, all family correspondence should be done by email. They have the capacity to do that without any increased cost. They could do that tomorrow. Grandma wants to send brownies to little Joey, who's doing, you know, 10 to 20 for robbery. That's fantastic, but he's got to wait for 15 years before he gets the brownies, you know, because they're chock full of all kinds of exotic cannabinoids and synthetic drugs, and it should be done tomorrow.
Those are some policy suggestions that the Department of Corrections could change tomorrow. And I think the governor's working towards some of at least the camera-sided thoughts. What actions should the legislature take? Where should the law change?
Myself and somebody that I've gotten to know very well over the course of these prosecutions, Ruben Lindo, he's an activist out of New York City. Ruben and I have proposed what's known as the Duty to Intervene Act. It would make it a felony for a corrections officer to stand by and watch an inmate being beaten to death. If the person is not killed but seriously injured, that also would be a felonious conduct. Very, very simple. It's a clear-cut statute. Ruben was getting a lot of support for it in his lobbying efforts, and then, as usual, the Speaker, Heastie, killed it.
Well, we know the state legislature didn't get very far with its legislative agenda this year because the state budget took so much longer, months longer.
Oh, they did. You must not have been reading closely. They did a lot of mischievous things. But
I mean, beyond the budget policies,
yeah.
You're right. That leads me to my next question. I know one of the things that helped help the prison strike get beyond was promises that a committee would review the HALT Act. Well, committee did that. Mm-hmm. The governor was very happy to send the list of recommendations out to the public, but it's all contingent on what the legislature does. Right. And to my knowledge, the legislature did very little consideration of evolving the HALT Act whatsoever. And I just wonder, why the governor didn't push for changes more. That's a question for her. But what is the legislative responsibility to look at prisons and especially the HALT Act, which led to a very disastrous strike situation within the prisons that really isn't over because the National Guard is still in these buildings.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to make legislation about things you know nothing about. And I don't purport to be an expert on corrections. I've made that very, very clear. But some things were obvious to me, and reconsideration of the HALT Act is obvious. There are some individuals that just do not belong, even with other incarcerated individuals. I think it's going to lead to, you know, litigation and potential million-dollar settlements. But I was stunned that after Robert's death, that there wasn't a groundswell of support for not only that, but other things that I was talking about, cameras and body-worn cameras, duty to intervene act, things like that. Don't let this guy die for nothing.
All right. We'll take another break. More with the Onondaga County District Attorney. We'll hit some issues here at home when we return. Newsmakers is back. Our guest is Onondaga County District Attorney Bill Fitzpatrick. We're to talk about some local issues that, of course, his office is involved with. Recently, you were able to indict Jeremy DeGonzak. His son died in his home a couple of years ago, basically a dirty, drug-ridden home. It took some time for you to be able to get the evidence together, get this to a grand jury. Why the length of time?
Because I wanted to charge him with murder. And we were ethical prosecutors in my office. We have to follow the evidence. And that little guy had such a miserable life and was surrounded by such horrid conditions for so long that it made it difficult to pinpoint, well, who exactly provided the fentanyl that killed him. And thus we were limited because of his parental duties to his father. That's very frustrating to me. I hope that there's a serious overhaul regarding how CPS deals with cases like this. My investigation is not over. I know 2 workers were fired, but it's clear that either they had blinders on or they were not being completely honest with what they saw and what they did.
If honesty is a factor, could these workers face criminal investigation?
Well, they could, but it's very unlikely the passage of time is in their favor due to the statute of limitations, but I'm not foreclosing anything. I continue to look into this. It's a massive undertaking, and we'll do the best we can.
You're pretty close with the county executive.
Very close.
Have you spoken to him about what needs to change on the policy side at CPS?
Yes, he is. If there's one person as aware of it as me, it's him.
Speaking of the county executive, very imminently, the legislature of the county has moved forward with their side of being able to impose term limits on his office, the county executive's office, and the legislature promises the office of comptroller in the weeks ahead. The legislature doesn't have jurisdiction over your office as DA. That comes through the state constitution.
Thank you, God.
And I'm wondering what you feel about term limits on the county level.
If the person is the best person for the job, are you going to eliminate his or her possibilities of ascending to that office because they've been so good at it? These are, I generally consider them dodges. They don't change anything. There's a lot of states that have power, that have term limits. They haven't affected government at all. I remember years ago, and I apologize to all other mayors if I've offended you, and Sharon Owens is not included because she's still new, so we'll leave her out of the equation. But I think the best mayor I ever worked with was Tom Young. And he got term limited. And ironically enough, the people that were pushing the term limits, who all wanted to be mayor, lost in primaries and never got their chance to be mayor. It's all about power. It's, geez, we've had, I know it's a one-party state, but you got to give, I always say, you can have your piece of the pie, but when there's a few crumbs left over, let the Republicans have a crumb or two before you, devour the entire plate in front of them, I just think I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't say it was a bad idea. I mean, I've been elected 8 times, so it's not something that I would be particularly in favor of.
Will you be elected a 9th time?
I don't know. I'm going to make that decision. I know I indicated a couple of years ago, and I'm sure some of my fans in the press are waiting to chop my head off. I know I indicated I probably wasn't going to run, but this experience with Oneida, the appeals coming up, the absolute love that I have for the job, I've got some very, very lucrative offers, but I am who I am, and I'm a prosecutor, and I'll see what people think. I'll do a little informal, not a formal poll, but just, call some friends and supporters and probably make that decision after the elections.
Are you leaning toward running?
Yes.
Another race that will happen before yours is the race for governor. You've developed a good relationship with this governor, but you also have one of your former employees on the Republican ticket as lieutenant governor candidate.
What a great guy.
Would are you weighing in? Will you?
A prosecutor is an elected prosecutor by the canons of ethics cannot endorse another candidate, but I can certainly say what I feel. I expressed my opinions about Governor Hochul with me. I find her very engaging, very compassionate, very gracious. I have not met Bruce Blakeman, but my understanding is that people like him in Nassau County. If Todd Hood was running for governor, I might make an exception because he's such a great guy.
All right. We will take our final break and have a final word with the district attorney after this. DA Fitzpatrick, we only have a few seconds left, but it sounds like you're leaning toward running again. We did have a little fun and go into the archives to find some, some relatively long ago footage.
Look at all that hair.
And this is the new courthouse, so it's not even the oldest footage we're capable of finding. We'll save that for another day, but...
You just missed my daughter. She was in the front row. She's now in that courtroom herself trying cases.
That's you at the Stacey Castor trial, I think. Remember those days?
Sure, that's the guy that Diane fell in love with.
That's
what a
right.
handsome guy.
That's right. DA Bill Fitzpatrick, thanks for being here. Thanks for your public service to Central New York and New York State.
Thanks, Andrew.
Be well.
Thanks for you.
That does it for Newsmakers. For all the hardworking people of News Channel 9, have a great weekend.
Download the WSYR Plus app on your TV to stream News Channel 9 for free. Just go to your smart TV, search WSYR Plus in the App Store, and download to start streaming today.